Welcome back to A Dog's Devotion. As we begin our second season, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for listening, sharing, and supporting this journey. Your encouragement has meant the world to me, and it inspires me to keep bringing you these heartfelt stories about the incredible bond we share with our dogs. We're starting this season with a very special episode. Many of you have reached out about pet loss and the grief that follows. To honor that, I'm joined by Beth Bigler, a compassionate pet loss grief counselor who offers wisdom and comfort for anyone walking through this difficult path. I invite you to listen, and please share this episode with someone who might need support. Together, we can continue to celebrate love, healing, and the devotion of our dogs. Welcome to A Dog's Devotion, the heartfelt podcast for every dog lover. Here, we celebrate the unbreakable bond between humans and their dogs. Each week, we sit down with inspiring guests who share powerful stories of love, resilience, and devotion. From the joy of adoption to the heartbreak of loss and the healing that follows, this is a space where we honor our best friends, the ones who leave paw prints on our hearts forever. Welcome to A Dog's Devotion. On today's episode, we're exploring one of the most difficult yet important parts of loving our dogs, the grief we face when we lose them. My guest is Beth Bigler, a compassionate pet loss grief counselor who supports grieving guardians all around the world. Through her work, she empowers and validates the deep pain of losing a beloved animal companion, helping people navigate their grief with understanding and kindness. She is also the author of Honoring Our Animals, which we'll talk about in depth because there's no book like it out there. It is a beautiful book dedicated to finding meaning, comfort, and connection in the midst of loss. I'm honored to welcome Beth to the podcast to shed light on this vital conversation and remind us that no one has to walk this path alone. Beth, thank you so much for joining me. This is such an important topic for me.
It's great to be here, and I appreciate you shining a light on this topic. It's massively under talked about in our culture, so thank you for
It
creating.
is. And, I'm going to ask you if you went through the same thing I did, but, I lost my soul dog, and that was the worst thing I've ever experienced in my life. So I really started this podcast to honor him and to let other people know that pain is real. Like, I was in deep grief and going down the rabbit hole rather quickly. And I don't think I'm alone. I've met a lot of people over the last year who have felt the same way. That inspired me to start this podcast. What inspired you to become a grief counselor?
Well, yeah, not very many people wake up in the morning when they're a little kid and say, well, I want to be a pet loss grief
That's
counselor
right.
with my career. So I enjoyed a 20 plus year career in film and television as a writer and a producer. So this was not my path. However, my soulmate, Arnie, who is not a dog, by the way, but I know we are all species friendly here. This is
That's
Arnie.
right. Oh,
He's
okay.
my soulmate cat. And Arnie, of course, it was my whole heart. It was there for all the ups and downs. He was my absolute rock, my anchor, my protector. And when he received a devastating terminal diagnosis when he was only 11 years old, I just felt I could not go on. I did not know if I could make it. And so fortunately, I reached out for some support. I found an incredible pet loss grief counselor to help me on the anticipatory side of things, because anticipatory grief is so real.
Right.
And when I was doing that work, I thought, wow, this is incredible, transformative, life-changing work I was doing in that grief counseling. And I understood my relationship with Arnie so much better. And most importantly, I understood how I could show up and try to give him a good death. Fortunately, we had kind of a miracle. We tried a chemotherapy for his rare cancer, and it worked. And he went into a remission. And we thought, terrific, he's going to live till like 25. That was my plan because that kind of cancer he had wasn't going to return. And so but I actually continued working with my pet loss grief counselor because she was so amazing. And she just was teaching me a lot about myself, a lot about my relationship to Arnie and to my other cat. And unfortunately, Arnie transitioned very unexpectedly about a year after his original diagnosis from a different cancer, a cancer that came in very swiftly. And there was nothing we could do. But because I had done that work to kind of be a little more prepared, to be ready to be able to show up for him, I was able to give him a good death, even though it was a total blindside.
Mm-hmm.
Once that happened, though, I realized, this experience of working on this grief counseling has been profound for me. I had also had an opportunity a few months before his transition to help somebody in a waiting room of a veterinary hospital who was facing the euthanasia of her beloved. And all of those things kind of put together, I just thought, you know what, it's time to change my life and to pursue this. So I started my training and obviously did a lot of grieving for Arnie and opened my practice. And here we are many years later. In my private practice, I support individuals and couples and families who are experiencing their own sorrow, both before, during, and after their beloved's transitions, and work with my clients to help develop their ability to feel connected to their beloved, to cope with those kind of crippling grief symptoms we often experience, and to help them find ways to feel validated, supported, and ultimately empowered in their grief experience.
Yeah, I think that's amazing, Beth. The work that you do is incredible. How curious, how is pet loss grief similar to or different from grieving, say, a loved one?
Well, there are certainly a lot of similarities. So I'll talk about some of the differences. Some of
Okay.
the things that I hear my clients saying over and over, and of course this is true for me, is our beloveds, right? Very often, this is the most intimate and loving relationship we have in our lives. The physicality of our relationship with them is so profound. We are touching them, we're interacting with them physically. Even if we have a partner or a child in our home, we might be touching our dog more times in a day than we touch anybody else in our house. The proximity, they're with us all the time. They're with us in every crevice of our daily routine. The way we talk to them all the time, the way they listen to us all the time, the understanding they offer us, their loyalty, it's unmatched to virtually any human relationship we have. They are entwined in every single joy and sorrow and laughter that goes on. And those routines are things that not only are satisfying for our hearts, they're very powerful for our brain. And one of the reasons we have such a hard time is that our brain has a very difficult time adjusting to that change in routine, which is different than a human loss where you may be very close with the person, but typically they live not in your home. You don't have as much intimacy and proximity. And that is a difference. And then also in the relationship, and when's the last time any of our dogs lied to us, or made us feel bad about ourselves, or held some unrealistically high expectation? We get gifts from our dogs that we may never have felt from the humans in our lives: acceptance, unconditional love, that unwavering support and loyalty. On your worst day, in your worst moment, your dog never looked at you and shamed you or made you feel bad about yourself. And so that, I think, is a huge difference from sort of the humans in our lives. When they transition, oftentimes we have much more complexity around those relationships. And also, our identity. Our beloveds and our dogs, they are a huge part of who we are. Our social activities, our events, all these things we do around them.
Hmm.
Many people I work with, their whole lives revolve around their dog. And if their dog can't go, they don't go, kind of thing. And so when they transition, we often just feel aimless. Where's my purpose? Where's my meaning? Am I still a dog mom? So
Hmm.
for all these reasons and many more, I could go on, this loss can be as distressing or more upsetting as a human loss. And many people come to me and they are shameful. They say, I just feel so bad. I feel so much worse about this than I did when my dad transitioned or my brother transitioned, and I feel bad. And I say, hey, these are different losses. Comparing grief to grief is like comparing apples and dinosaurs. It's not productive. But there are many reasons why this type of relationship can feel absolutely shattering and unmooring for people.
Yeah, and I know firsthand, and I'm sure you hear from your clients, but everybody wants to give you a bit of advice, and some people would tell me, do this, do that, you shouldn't feel this, you should feel that, but I don't. In my experience, there is no right or wrong. That grief is real, and for me, it was the worst grief I'd ever felt over losing loved ones in my life, because that dog was like was more of a partner to me
Yes.
than anybody, because he was my best friend, and it was during COVID too. So it was only him and I. Like, there's so many variables that people don't think about,
Yes.
how attached we get to these animals, whether it's a dog or a cat.
And you just brought up my least favorite word in all of grief. So I'm going to just touch on it because you
Okay.
said it. And I usually, if I'm in session with clients and this word comes up, I do the X. I do this.
Okay.
And that's the S
What
word,
did
the
I
should,
say?
the shoulding, the should, the should, the shouldn't, right? And when we hear anything that starts with should or shouldn't from anybody else, and especially with ourselves, that's
Yes.
a warning sign. That's a red flag. That's a word that we don't want to welcome into our grief, because it can be a very challenging word and is usually not coming from a supportive place. So next time someone shoulds all over you, or you should all over yourself, we're gonna X that.
We're gonna X that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll remember that.
Yes.
So we touched on it a little bit, but why do you think society often minimizes or misunderstands, as I was just saying, the depth of losing a pet?
Well, for starters, even if we take the pets out of it for a second, we're in a pretty death phobic, grief illiterate culture. Most
Right.
people in our culture, we are not great with grief to begin with. We're not great when we have human loss. Our culture is really obsessed with gaining and acquiring. We don't talk about loss in our culture unless it's losing weight. So there's really a cultural problem here about grief literacy, death literacy. We weren't modeled in our families about grieving and mourning, or that there's even a difference between those two things. Many people, in my family, if someone died, everyone like cried for a day. We had a funeral. We never talked about it again. That's how I grew up. And a lot of people grew up like that. So I think, like, baseline, we're just not in a grief literate culture. However, pet loss grief is a particularly disenfranchised grief. That's the word for it. Disenfranchised grief means a grief that isn't like openly acknowledged or socially mourned, culturally, publicly supported. It's not recognized as a significant loss because pets aren't seen as worthy of grief. That's why we have people saying things like, oh, well, it's just a dog, or it's only a bunny,
Yeah.
which leads to grievers feeling minimized, isolated, embarrassed, shamed. But no one's sending sympathy cards. No one's bringing over casseroles.
No.
Employers are not giving their employees time off work for pet bereavement, and people don't even know what to do. So, there's a lot of work here to be done, creating kind of a cultural shift on the human animal bond and the impact of animals in the first place and the grief. So, it's part of my mission. I'm trying to normalize this grief. I'm trying to kind of change the way that companies and medias and individuals perceive what this loss means and how do we support it. So, I'm hoping in the future we are going to be making big shifts on that. And we already are.
Yeah.
And the more that we can make these shifts, then no guardian is ever going to have to come to me and wonder if they're, quote, crazy or, quote, weird or, quote, overreacting. I want grievers to know that their feelings are valid. Their feelings are profound. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to receive help for this kind of loss. And really, I do believe things are shifting and changing. I'm seeing that constantly, but it's slow. It's going to be
It
really
is
slow.
slow, but I think it is changing. I think you're right. As more people are getting pets instead of human companions, a lot of
Yep.
women aren't getting married. They're quite
Yes,
happy with their dog. I mean, society is changing, and as that
totally.
does, this will too. What are the more common emotions guardians experience, both in anticipatory grief and after a loss?
Wow. Well, there's many, many,
Yeah.
but the ones, that come to mind on the post loss side, of course, guilt. Guilt's a huge guilt, shame, and regret are
It is, and
huge.
why do we feel I can't tell you how many mornings I wake up and I feel so guilty. I
Yeah,
just
you
feel
you want to
guilty.
get into it? You want to go get into guilt
Can
right
we
now?
have a session?
You listen, guilt. Yeah, let's talk about guilt for a second. Guilt's the number one thing that people come to me for typically. The two things that people really come to me for are the overwhelming guilt, shame, regret, and the looping about that, the questioning, the what if, the woulda, coulda, shoulda, all of that.
Right.
The other thing people come for is they want to stay connected to their beloved. They want to think of their beloved and feel warm and ooey gooey and yummy instead of like all these sad things. And so a lot of people know one of my specialties is helping people stay connected and feel connected and evolve that relationship. But guilt on the kind of symptom side of things is really tough. Now, listen, it makes sense, right? Our beloveds are our entire responsibility. Your dog and all of their choices, from their food to their exercise to their socialization, everything is on you. And so when we are unable to save them, when you're unable to find a way to cure whatever the problem is or prevent the accident or whatever it is, of course, we feel a responsibility for that. The other part of the why is that many of us are very hard on ourselves about all parts of life, not just this. We have a tough, critical voice. We are not as kind and compassionate and loving to ourselves as we are to other people. And so, very often, when this comes up and we start getting some of these guilt feelings, we find a way to make it about ourselves. We blame and we're critical. But some important things about guilt: number one, just because you feel guilty about something doesn't mean you have actually done something wrong. And this is a huge distinction. Guilt implies, oh, well, we've done something wrong. We deserve to be punished. And that punishment looks like questioning, looping, woulda, coulda, shoulda-ing, why didn't I, all of that, right? And all of that is coming from a place of hindsight bias. because the thing has already happened. If we had had a crystal ball, we might have done things differently because we might have wanted to know or might have known how it was going to turn out. But we didn't know that. We didn't have that crystal ball. But very often after the fact, we come in and we're hard on ourselves about the fact we didn't have the crystal ball. So one thing, if you're having guilt, you want to really think about, did I do something wrong here? Or was I working with the best knowledge, information, resources, medical advice I had at the time? And that is a distinction that sometimes grief makes it hard for us to find. Also, we're looking for control. Oftentimes, death, we feel very powerless, very helpless, very out of control. And for a lot of us, it's safer to blame ourselves and to think we could have done something to change the way it turned out, as opposed to think that like this horrible thing could just happen to us. And particularly if you grew up in an environment where you were conditioned that it was your job to help manage chaos and crisis, and maybe it was always on you growing up to kind of solve things and fix things. When you can't fix this, when you can't solve for this, it's kind of a default pattern for many people to go to that place of like self blame and self
Hmm.
criticism. And so that's part of it as well. And what we want to really try to do when those guilt feelings are coming up, first of all, number one thing I want all grievers to do is begin a self-compassion practice. If you don't already have a self-compassion practice in place, let's get that going. And self-compassion is crucial. If you don't know anything about self-compassion, a great place to start is Dr. Kristen Neff, who's our foremost researcher for self-compassion. She has a great book called Self-Compassion. Go read that book. Start offering yourself self-compassion in your daily life because that will help with the guilt. Another big thing is to focus on what you did do. Guilt has a way of zooming in on what you didn't do. Guilt is
Right.
very fixated on what you didn't do. And we often forget what we did do. And we have to keep reminding ourselves about that because that really gets shoved out, in our brains. And in a perfect world, guilt is not a bad emotion. Guilt could show up to try to teach us something or prepare for the future. So, like looking at those guilt feelings and saying, all right, what is this guilt maybe trying to teach me for the future? Can I learn something from this? And that's not me saying with toxic positivity, oh, we have to learn from every experience. Sometimes we learn nothing. Sometimes there is no lesson. Okay. But often when that guilt gets pinged, it's because we're like, okay, well, what might I do differently in the future if I were in a different circumstance? But the truth is, a lot of times we would do the exact same thing. We would make the exact same choices because we were doing the best we could with the information we had at the time, because we love our dogs. And the fact that it didn't work out the way we wanted, the fact that we couldn't save their lives, oftentimes there's nothing we could really do about that. And sometimes asking that question, would I do something differently in the future if the situation were presenting the same and we realize we would make those same choices? That's very clarifying.
Right.
But I also love to also take it to someone, take it to a trusted friend, take it to, a clergy member. If you have a religious institution, take it to a grief counselor like me. I spend a lot of time with my clients working through things that they feel guilty about. And so it's always nice to talk it through with someone who can see it from a different lens. And I always say, ask your beloved too. If you're struggling with feelings of guilt, go ahead and ask Max. Hey, Max, do you think my guilt about this is sensical? Does that make sense to you? Is it rational? Let's see what he has to say about it.
Right.
Because I'm guessing 9 times out of 10, he's going to be like, I don't think that's a thing that
Yeah.
we need to put on your guilt card.
So, other than trying to get over the guilt and you working with people about that horrible feeling, what other first steps do you recommend to begin healing for someone who has just lost
Well, in some
everyone?
ways, it depends what they're working with, because oftentimes we have a lot of big emotions happening at once. You asked about some of the common feelings, guilt, yes, but also longing and shock and disbelief and discombobulation, a lot of physical symptoms we have, and sadness, anger, comparison, spiritual questioning. So we have a lot of things going on at once. It's a full
Yeah.
body experience. It's physical, it's emotional, it's social, it's cognitive. So there's a lot happening. But always, my first step with people is to just validate what they're experiencing. All these huge feelings, they're valid, they're profound. You're not alone in them. And we want to allow those feelings to move through you. We don't want to stuff them down. We don't want to minimize them. So if you got to scream, scream. If you have to rage, rage. If you have to whimper, whimper. And the more you can release these feelings and allow them to be, definitely that's a good place to begin. With my clients, I always begin in the day-to-day, the daily routine, because that's a place where the adjustment is hardest to make. So we do a lot of techniques and tools and strategies for kind of adjusting to that day-to-day kind of adjustment. Also, One of the things many of my clients struggle with, and I think a lot of us struggle with in general, is receiving help. So when someone says, "Hey, what can I do? Can I help you?" Please say yes. Say yes to every person who offers to help you, and preferably have a
Yeah.
list ready. Now, this may sound ridiculous, but because you know how people say, "Let me know if there's anything you need." Well, that's
Yes.
not helpful, but people don't know what else to say. So we got to do a little bit of labor on our end as grievers to be like, "Okay, here's my list. Can you, cancel my Chewy deliveries from coming? Can you
Right.
notify my veterinarian? Can you come take my surviving dog for a walk? Can you come do my laundry?" I mean, there are things we need help with. And it's okay to make a list of those things. So when someone says, "Let me know how I can help," you can be like, "Okay, well, choose from one of these three things because I do need help." Many people also find it supportive to connect with other grievers. So whether that's in an online community or on an Instagram page, like my Instagram page, people love to come and read other people's stories and read other people's comments and interact with that. For many people, finding other people who are going through this and learning where your commonalities and your differences are can be super helpful. Really in the beginning, just validating that this is a very tough experience. Also, rest and nourishment and hydration, which sounds so basic, but those three things, especially in the beginning, this is like an injury. It's like you have a wound. And so we want to really rest. We want to clear your schedule. We want to make a lot of space for nourishment and for keeping you going, because in the very beginning, it's survival and we got to
Hmm.
survive it.
Yeah, that's so true. That's great advice, Beth. Thanks, to really take people up when they offer, is there something you could do? Because I would always be no. No, there's nothing you can do. If you can bring Max back, that would be terrific, but that's not going to happen. So that's a lesson I should have learned is I should have taken people up on it.
You're shooting again. Carla, you're shooting again.
Okay, there's the X.
I don't like to X you because it's your podcast, but here's the thing. Think about that's something that if I'm in that position in the future, I aspire. I aspire to be able to ask for more help. It would be kinder to myself to receive help. I desire more help in the future, or even I want. Those are some words you can use instead of should. It would be easier
Okay.
for me in the future
Okay.
if I could receive help. It'll take a while, but you can make it like a swear jar in your house. Just put $5 in every time you should.
You know how much how rich I would be right now?
It's so true, but that really is it because there are things, and you gotta like what I like to do if you have the bandwidth, like make a list of your friends, your family, like the people in your lives who you think would show up if you made an ask, and literally next to their name, right? Who would be good at that? Because we have friends who would be good at some of the logistical side of things and taking care of canceling appointments and things like that. We
Right.
have friends who would be good at just sitting on the couch with us and holding the space, or coming over to just watch a movie and kind of having a distraction. We all have a friend who we can go out for coffee with and they can tell us about their problems in their life and kind of distract us in that way. That might be nice. We also have friends who we don't mind asking, "Hey, could you help me fold the laundry?" So kind of think about the strengths in your community, in your friends and your family, and make those specific asks. If we can all get better at doing that, not just in grief, we'd all have an easier time walking through the world.
So true. Yeah, so true. I want to talk a little bit about honoring our animals, which there is not another book like this. And it's a really different book because there's daily meditations in here. And then you have like a piece of work that people can or cannot do if they choose to. And then what I find is just interesting is that you use specific terms for certain words that we would normally use. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that and what inspired this.
Yeah, well, the language we use around grief, as you can already tell, because I'm already all over you about your
I
shoulding,
know.
language is really important in grief. And especially around pet loss, we just don't have a lot of language that is even appropriate in my eyes. So, yes, in the book, I do talk about, I use the word beloved instead of pet, because some people find the word pet kind of pejorative. I use the word guardian instead of owner. Yes, legally, animals are property. Owner is pales in comparison to all the many roles we play in our beloved's life. So, I like the
Right.
word guardian for that. So I do have I have a little glossary of word substitutions, things that the words
Hmm.
that I like to say that I find are more supportive. But the book, I really wanted to create something that didn't exist. And what doesn't exist until now is something that you can hand to a friend, to a coworker, to someone who's experienced this, and or hand to yourself to say, "Hey, here's something that every single day is going to bring you some support that will be actionable, helpful tools that you can use, strategies you can use." So the meditations, they're short, little reflections, and usually they're talking about kind of one of three things. Sometimes they're talking about what do we do with these grief symptoms? What do we do with our feelings? What do we do with our anger? or our guilt or our longing. How do we cope with those? And then sometimes we're talking about ourselves. How are we bringing in more self-compassion? How are we coping with this identity shift? How can we be kinder to ourselves in all of this? And of course, a big thread in the book is about our connection with our beloveds, and what are some concrete things we can do to feel more connected to them through ritual and daily practices, keeping them included as the honored ancestors that they are in our lives. How can we feel in collaboration with them? And each of these meditations has an invitation, like you said, which is just one action item that you can or cannot choose to do, to give you something concrete. One thing that's really tough in grief is that a lot of books and things about grief, they're very theoretical, but they don't tell us, like, what do I do? And a lot of us are
Right.
wondering, what do I do? So the book kind of gives you every single day of the year something to do, something to try, see what resonates. Another part of the book I love, in the back, there's an index. So you can
Yes.
actually go to the index. So if you're having a guilt day, you can go look at all the entries that talk about guilt, or you're having an anger day, you can read all the entries about anger. Or if you want to make art with your beloved and you want to do some art projects, or go to the art entries. There's a lot of different ways to approach your grief. And sometimes looking at that index, you can really target whatever's coming up for you most. So it's definitely not a book you have to use in the daily order that it's presented. You can open up to any entry any day. And a lot of my clients do that. They just flip around until they see something that catches their eye and they make that their
Right.
focus for the day. So I'm very proud of the way the book can be used. It's very inclusive, and it's a very kind and loving way to approach, supporting your grief.
Yeah, I love it. I thought it was great. And of course, at the end, you've got the grieving guardian glossary and then your grief feelings wheel, which that was really interesting for me to understand my feelings and then what that means and what that looks like to myself and maybe how I'm treating other people around me. So
Yes. Yeah. The feelings wheel is really useful. So many of us, if someone says to you, how are you feeling? We might not even be able to answer. We may not have a word. I mean, we're feeling 100 things at once, right? So I have a lot of different exercises and activities within the book that reference the feelings wheel, ways you can use that feelings wheel to identify what you're feeling, to go deeper about what you're feeling, to really pinpoint what you're feeling. Because the more we can name what's going on with us, the more we have words to express what's going on, it's often easier to support because we know what's happening, as opposed to, I feel sad. Well, sad is one thing, but there's a whole bunch of other words around sad that you might be feeling. And being able to name and pinpoint is really empowering, and can help us support those feelings a little better.
yeah, I agree. I'm curious with your one-on-one work because you work with one-on-one with people around the world.
Yeah.
What have you learned about resilience, love, and the human dog or cat bond?
Oh, wow. So many things, I think the loudest thing perhaps that I always reflect about when I'm in sessions with people is the incredible way in which our beloveds truly are our teachers. And I just see this day in and day out. Our beloveds teach us so many things about ourselves, about our lives, about the world, that I don't know that we could get any other way. And I'm constantly struck by that. I'm constantly struck by the ways in which they open doors for us. Our animals and dogs, of course, they teach us a lot about love. They teach us we are worthy to receive love. We are worthy to give love. They teach us that when we mess up or have a bad day, that we are worthy of receiving compassion and kindness in that. They teach us about the importance of rest. They teach us about the importance of play and joy and fun. And every time I'm working with a client and I'm hearing these stories of the ways in which their beloved has impacted their lives and how it's enriched them, I'm struck. I'm just absolutely struck by that, because it's true for me and it's true for every guardian. And why I think it's so powerful to recognize that and celebrate that is because those gifts do not go away. Those are instilled in us. Those are the seeds we have. We have the best teacher in the universe while our beloveds were earthside, and that teaching can continue. And so one of the things I love to do is to get into what those lessons are, what those teachings are, and then what doors are opening now, even after their transition, that we can lean into and can we use, and how can we keep developing because they've opened that door for us, or the many doors for us. So I think, like, the loudest thing I'm always thinking after a session is, wow, what an impactful relationship, what gifts and what teachings, and seeing the way that we can take those gifts, guidance, lessons, and teachings and carry their legacy into the world and allow their legacy to propel us, and that we can give to the world what they've given to us. For me personally, every time I go into a session, I'm showing up as Arnie. I'm trying to do the things
You
Arnie
are.
always did for me. I'm trying to hold that space that he always held for me. I'm trying to help people feel loving toward themselves the way he always made me feel toward me. If I show up as Arnie, I'm doing my job. And I think if we each can show up as our beloved in the world and take those gifts, take their power, we're going to have a much better, kinder world, and we'll always be living their legacy. And that's my dream, for my clients, and for myself.
That's interesting. Yeah. I also wanted to ask you, this is what for me, this helped me a lot, figuring out a way how to keep their memory alive or how to cope with what I was going through. And I know you mentioned this, but I started journaling. So every morning, first thing I do in the morning is I write a little note to Max and I
Yes.
tell him how I feel and what
Yeah.
I did yesterday. And
Yeah.
so that's what I do. Do you recommend to your clients to do something like this, or are there other ways that they can
Yeah. Here's mine.
cope?
Here's my letters to
Great.
Arnie. He has a little name on the side. This is what I use to write to Arnie. Yeah, I've got that. I talk to him all the time in letters. I also write letters from him to me. I love writing letters to and writing from. That's really powerful. I love things that involve journaling. I also love making lists. I love making those life lessons lists. I love writing haikus and little poems for our beloveds. I love the ABCs, where we write down the ABCs down the side of the page and we write a letter that reminds us of our beloved for each letter of the alphabet. I love creating lists of things I never want to forget and my favorite memories and all those things. I love advice letters. Whenever I'm stuck, whenever I'm in a jam, I always ask Arnie for some advice and I see what he's got. So I love writing. However, journaling and writing is not everybody's jam. And so we
Right.
also want to recognize that. And in fact, for some people, journaling kind of can make things feel worse sometimes. So, I teach my clients, the number one thing I want you to be, if you're a client of mine, is I want you to be in a we mindset. Okay. It's a we mindset. So Max and I are doing the podcast together, right? We
Right.
are doing the podcast. Arnie and I are showing up in sessions. And that mindset was very easy when our beloveds were earthside, and it doesn't need to shift. So what I mean by that is bring your beloved along for everything. So when you're going for a walk, oh yeah, Max and I are going for a walk, and that's time you get to hang out. That's time you get to spend. When I'm pumping the gas at the gas station, that is one time I just close my eyes, I tune into Arnie and I hang out with him. I talk to him, right? I have all these little rituals in my day where I can keep him connected. But there's other ways to feel connected. I love lighting candles. You see me doing that on Instagram all the time. I do it in sessions. I'm brushing my teeth. I love to light a candle and think about Arnie and say a few words. It's a great 2 minutes of connection time. I love wearing jewelry that reminds me of Arnie. I love cooking some of his favorite foods and eating them as a meal. I've got playlists of songs that remind me of Arnie. I love using tarot cards and oracle cards to connect with him. I love making art projects in his honor. I love doing acts of service and acts of kindness in his name. All those kinds of things help keep connected. One thing a lot of my clients love that I've popularized is using his name everywhere I go, like at the coffee shop. So if I order a coffee and they ask me for my name, I give them Arnie's name. And so when they
You
call
do.
out Arnie's name in the coffee shop, the whole coffee shop hears Arnie's name, because isn't our beloved's name our favorite sound in the world? So anytime I
Mhm.
have a coffee order, takeaway order, anytime I can use it, I'm going to be hearing his name, and that keeps him alive and vibrant. My son's middle name is named after Arnie because I wanted his name to stay in our family. So, having this we mindset that we are doing things together, we are in collaboration. I have my clients write lists of all the things they want to do to collaborate with their beloved, because there are so many projects we can start. There's so many ways we can show up in the world with our beloved. And I don't want anyone to ever fear that the relationship is over. The relationship is vibrant and alive, and we can continue to give to it and receive from it. And sometimes in early grief, that's hard to imagine. It's hard to think about. We've got to ease some of the other things that are going on first. But ultimately, when someone graduates from working with me or any of the practitioners in my practice, I want them to feel like they are confident and capable that their relationship is going to be able to continue, and they have a lot of different tools and ways to do that feel organic and right for them. It's different for everybody,
Mm.
but at the end of the day, I want everybody to be able to feel like, yeah, my relationship is very present. We talk about our beloveds in the present tense a lot of the time, with my clients. I do too. I talk about Arnie sometimes in past tense, often in present tense, because he is, for me, still a very big part of my life.
Right. Right. I feel that too. If you could share one message with someone currently grieving their dog or cat, what would it be?
One message.
Just
There's
one.
so many messages. I mean, I think like the three things I would say
Okay.
are: you are not alone, your feelings are valid, and your relationship continues.
Okay, that's good. I'm curious on a personal level because sometimes just talking to people about this will stir up feelings that I have put away and I haven't thought about for a while. I can actually get a little upset. I know you've been doing this for a while and you're a professional, but do you ever leave a session or in a session with a client and it just is heart-wrenching for you?
Of course, of course, the work I do is very difficult. Yeah. Now, on one level, I have my own therapist. I still have my pet loss grief counselor who's retired pretty much now, but I go to her sometimes for things, and I have a therapist, and I have great support around me, and strong friends and family, and a lot of my own self care, self compassion practices, so that I don't get compassion fatigue or burnout because that's a high risk, with what I do. Especially, I have a huge volume of clients that I see. I have to keep myself well and in check and supported on my own. But there are times in sessions when I will cry with my clients because they are going through something so difficult that, of course, I'm human. My emotions come up and I may cry with them. There are times when clients mention something that does remind me of something that happened with Arnie, or my other cat, Zelda, transitioned a few years ago, and that resonates with me. I even have moments, and I'm very open about this because I think it's important to normalize. I have moments sometimes where a client has had an experience kind of similar to what happened with Arnie. And Arnie's transition was very sudden. It was very strange. It was very hard. And sometimes I hear a client say something and I think, oh, could I have tried that? Would that have worked? And that's not necessarily guilt, but it's a questioning. It's like, did I not do that? And I have to kind of check that with myself and work through that. So certainly things come up that ping me on a personal level. Oftentimes people want to know what is the hardest part of my job, the thing that is most difficult in that regard. And I can tell you what it is because I know by a mile the hardest part of my job is that very often I work with anticipatory grievers who have a diagnosis or who have an animal who's in some sort of decline. And we know that that animal's earthside life is coming to a completion. And often I get to, and I find it a massive privilege and honor, but I get to say goodbye to that beloved. And of course, I've seen this animal in sessions. They've been with me. We may have known each other many months, and I know a lot about them. I know a lot about their guardian. And it's very important for me if I am able and if they are able, that I get to say to them what I want to say to help them have a safe passage with their transition and to give them some words of encouragement and love. And for a mile, by a mile, that is the hardest part of what I do is when I am kind of having those final earthside moments with a beloved whose guardian I've been supporting. And I very often feel very emotional after that. And I also find it such an honor and a privilege to be able to do that and to be able to model that as well for my clients. And that's hard for me. It's a very hard moment for me always.
Yeah. What's more difficult, or maybe everybody's different, when you know your pet is going to pass and you have to make that decision, or when it's really sudden. You mentioned Arnie was sudden, Max was sudden. I had no idea. I was on a plane, and he was on my lap. I had no idea that was going to happen.
Yes.
Which one? And you categorize and say one's worse than the other?
Well, one of the most interesting things I see in my work, one of the cool things when people are working with my practice, I have a whole private client community. It's away from social media. It's a private platform that I own and control and moderate. So my clients can come. We have weekly gatherings. We talk about different topics. You can have a lot of nice interaction with like-minded people who are going through a similar thing. And something that I see a lot when I'm in those groups with my clients is people have had a range of experiences. And so often, some of the people who've had a more sudden or unexpected or even accidental loss will say, gosh, my experience has been really difficult, but I never thought about what it would be like to have a 4-year sort of cancer up and down roller coaster, or a 4-year kidney decline going through those stages of kidney disease, right? And then very often the people who've had those very long, caregiving, difficult decision making at every turn experiences, they think their experience was so excruciating, and it was. Then they hear about like the suddenness and they think, oh, well, I can't imagine if I hadn't had the time to wrap my brain around it. So I see this all day, every day with my clients, kind of getting that perspective, that grass is greener perspective. So, I don't think any one type of loss or way it happens is harder than another. There are different things. There are different challenges, right? There are different things that come up in anticipatory grief. If you are having anticipatory grief, of course, it's a roller coaster, and you know that there is going to be an end, but you don't know when that's going to be, how it's going to be, how bad it's going to be. You don't know what kind of decision making you're going to have to make. You have the uncertainty. For many people, the idea of making a euthanasia decision is so painful, so difficult. So a lot of that is coming up when you are in anticipatory grief and you have this prolonged period. Whereas, on the The blindside experience, you're just in shock. You're in disbelief. You had no idea this was coming. How could this be? I thought we had more time. I didn't get to do the things I wanted to do. So they're so different, And I have had clients who say things like, I am grateful that I didn't have to make a euthanasia decision. I am grateful that it happened suddenly, or, I've heard that. And I've also had clients say, I'm grateful that I had that anticipatory time to kind of prepare and make sure I could say the things I wanted to say and do the things I wanted to do. So, many of my clients also find gratitude for how their experience went when they kind of start to think about it from different perspectives. But when I'm working with people, and I've worked with every type of situation of loss that can happen, there are just sometimes different emotions coming up that you wouldn't have had if you had a different kind of transition.
Right.
So they're just it's an apples and dinosaurs thing, right? There's really no
Right.
comparing and no saying which is harder or easier. You're just dealing with sort of a different set of particularly initial emotions.
Right. So how can people reach you if they want grief support or just to learn more about what you do?
Sure. Well, a lot of people just love to come to my Instagram page because it's
I
got
love your
so many
Instagram page.
resources. Thank you.
It's
Thank you.
so
Yeah.
good. There's always something on there that makes me feel better.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I post twice a day, original content about pet grief, all kinds of different topics and things. So a lot of people just love coming there because they can learn a lot. There's a lot of validation, great conversations in the comments. I do a lot of live events as well. I do live events on every single holiday. I do live events every month. I have a memorial service where we read the names of our beloveds. So I always encourage people to come to my Instagram, which is at Honoring Our Animals, because it's a wonderful community to be a part of. And I also have my website, which is honoringouranimals.com. Of course, there you can learn about working with me, working with my practice. You can reach out, make an inquiry. I love to have a conversation first to see if we're a good fit to work together. So if you're thinking of looking for more support, definitely reach out. We can have that conversation. I have a weekly newsletter as well that a lot of people love because it's just every Wednesday they get a little boost in their week with different ideas, inspirations, validation, and that covers both anticipatory and post-loss grief. So my newsletter is a great way to just sort of get some inspiration each week. And also I have a number of free downloads, free guides that you can get from my website, from my Instagram to help with a whole variety of topics. And of course, my book is
I
a
know.
wonderful resource and a great gift as well.
Yeah. Now you can order the book online because that's what I did.
Everywhere. Yeah, the book has been published all over the world. It's published by a big publisher. So it's in bookstores. You can go to any bookstore and get it or order it. It's also, of course, on Amazon and bookshop.org. Anywhere you can buy a book, my book is available.
It is there and it's a great read. It really helped me a lot.
Thanks,
But
Carla.
Beth, thank you so much for joining me. It was really it was a great learning experience for me and it helped validates my feelings. And I hope and I know actually this will help a lot of people who are going through the same thing, who are listening, who just know that you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for this amazing legacy work you are doing for Max and with Max. And may the two of you continue to do this work
We will.
forever.
We will, for sure. So thank you, Beth. Now, I just want to end and say losing a pet leaves a hole in our hearts that feels impossible to fill. But as Beth has shared today, honoring their memory and giving ourselves permission to grieve is a powerful part of healing. Her work and her book, Honoring Our Animals, are truly a gift for anyone navigating the difficult journey of pet loss. If you're struggling, and you all know that I have struggled, and as you can tell, I'm still struggling. I don't think that grief ever goes away. Some days it just gets a little bit easier. So I just want you all to know that you're not alone. I'm going through it. Beth has gone through it, and so many people have as well. So thank you, Beth, for bringing your light and your knowledge and your compassion to all of us today.
Thank you, Carla. And thank you, Max.
Yes, thank you, Arnie, too. Thanks, Beth. We'll talk soon. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on A Dog's Devotion. If today's story touched your heart, share it with a fellow dog lover. And remember, whether they're by your side or watching over you, our dogs are our greatest teachers of love, loyalty, and living in the moment. Until next time, give your pup an extra hug and never forget the devotion of a dog. I'm your host, Carla Bisacki. Thanks for joining me.